Good afternoon. My name is Mary Ann Wright, and I'm a 4-H area educator for Lincoln University Cooperative Extension. Thank you for joining us for our online programming today. Before we get started, let's recite the 4-H pledge. I pledge my head to clearer thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, and my health to better living, for my club, my community, my country, and my world. Thank you very much. So today we are doing an easy recipe, and it is DIY instant oatmeal. So this recipe is good because it's an alternative to the instant oatmeal packets that we can find in the grocery store. Not only is it cheaper to make our own mix, but it's also a little bit better for us. So for this recipe, you need few ingredients, and I'm hoping you have them in your pantry. The first is some quick oatmeal. You can also use regular rolled oats if you don't have any quick. We need some brown sugar, cinnamon, salt, and some dry milk. So those are the ingredients. Other than this, you also need a few things to make our recipe. One is a large mixing bowl. We also need a spoon to mix. We need a set of measuring cups and a set of measuring spoons. I also have a dishcloth here, or some paper towels would be good to have handy in case we spill, and a container to put our finished oatmeal in. So, when we look at our recipe, we see it calls for 10 cups of oats, and that's a lot of oats. And if you live in a house and you have brothers and sisters, and it might be your parents also eating this recipe with you, you probably can go through those oats pretty quickly because a normal serving is a half a cup. But I want to go ahead and half my recipe. So when we're going to do our recipe together, we're also going to talk about how we half our measurements when we're preparing something. Okay, so we have 10 cups of quick oats, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1.5 cups of brown sugar, 1 cup of non-fat dry milk, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. So now it's time to look at our instructions. Our first instruction is that we combine all of our ingredients together. So that is pretty easy. So I'm going to have my mixing bowl, and I've already added my oats to the mixing bowl. So again, it calls for 10 cups of oats. So I went ahead and halved it. So when I looked at my measuring cups, most sets of measuring cups come in a cup, half a cup, a third of a cup, and a quarter cup. So I went ahead and chose my cup measurement, and I poured 5 cups of my oats into my measuring cup and then put it in my bowl. Our next ingredient is 1 teaspoon of salt. So when we look at our measuring spoons, they typically come in a tablespoon, which is the largest one. And then we have a teaspoon, a half a teaspoon, and a quarter teaspoon. So this recipe calls for a whole teaspoon, but since we're halving it, I'm going to go ahead and use the half teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to take my salt, and I'm going to measure. And when I measure my ingredients, I want to make sure that I'm measuring over a cloth or over the counter where I can easily clean that up, and not over my mixing bowl, because in case the salt just comes pouring out, we don't want it to all get in our mix. So that's a tip, especially important when we're baking, because those measurements need to be really precise. It's less important today with our oatmeal, but it's still good practice. So when we measure, we're going to go ahead and pour this into our half a teaspoon. And see, I went over a little bit, so it's a good thing I had my dishcloth here that collected that extra. And I leveled it off just by shaking it a little bit. You can also take a knife and level that amount off. So then we're going to pour this into our mixing bowl. Okay, so now we have 2 of our ingredients. The next ingredient we have is brown sugar, and it calls for 1.5 cups of brown sugar. So here's our cup, and here's our 1/2 cup. Now this one's a little bit trickier when we're dividing it because it has a fraction in there. So what we want to do, we know that 1 cup is 2 halves. So that's 2 over 2. 1/2 cup is 1/2, 1 over 2. So we're going to add 2 and 1 together. So now we have 3 halves make up our 1.5 cup. So 3 over 2. And when we half that, we're going to take that bottom number and we're going to double it. So when you're measuring and you're doing math, it's kind of confusing because you think, oh, I want to half it, but really when you have that bottom number, you're going to double it. So really now our 3 halves, we're going to turn into 3 quarters. 3 over 4. So that means the easiest way for me to measure this is going to be my 1/4 cup. And I'm going to put 3 1/4 cups into my oatmeal mix. Now, the brown sugar is what's really going to sweeten our oatmeal mix. And so this is something that you can kind of play around with. If you make a batch and you're like, oh, that was really sweet, I really wish that it wasn't so sweet, you can take out some of your brown sugar in the next time that you use the recipe, or you can add a little bit of brown sugar the next time in the recipe. So I'm going to take my brown sugar here, and again, I'm going to fill up my 1/4 cup. Now with brown sugar, a lot of times we use in recipes, we pack it down. But for this recipe, we don't need to pack it down. We just want it a kind of a light cup there that's unpacked. So level it off as best you can and put that brown sugar in your mix. We're going to do this 3 times. And the 3rd. So there's our 3 1/4 cups of brown sugar in there. Now our next ingredient is our dry milk, and it calls for 1/2 cup of dry milk. And dry milk comes in different amounts, and in the store I just bought a small packet because this comes in a pack of 3, sometimes 6, and that way when I open it, it doesn't go bad as quickly. I can keep it and I don't have to worry about keeping it in an airtight container because I'm going to use a lot of it for this recipe. So, again, half of our recipe, so it calls for a whole cup, so we're going to use our 1/2 cup. So we pour out our dry milk here. I'm going to shake it off a little bit. Okay, so when it's pretty level, we're going to go ahead and add that 1/2 cup of dry milk to our recipe. Now we only have one more ingredient left, and that is our cinnamon. So this is another ingredient that's going to add some flavor. So it calls for 2 teaspoons of dry cinnamon. So I only have a small container here, and I don't want to pour it out and waste it. So I want to make sure that my measuring spoon can go into the dry cinnamon to get this. So 1/2 of 2 teaspoons is 1. But as you see, my 1 doesn't go in my bottle. So I'm going to use a 1/2, and I'm going to put 2 halves because that would equal a whole. So actually my 1/2 doesn't go in there very good. So I'm going to use my 1/4. So down to my 1/4 there. So now I need 4 quarters to make a whole. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now all my ingredients are in my bowl for my oatmeal. So it's time to mix it. Our second step in our recipe is to mix it all together. So I'm going to take that spoon. Let's be careful when we're mixing. Make sure we're not going over the sides there. Everything's staying in our bowl. Now our brown sugar might have a few clumps, so we're just going to take that spoon and we're going to try to break up as many clumps as we can there. as we mix it. So we want to make sure we mix it really well. That way our oatmeal will come out consistent every time we make it. Okay, so I think mine's pretty mixed there. So now it's time to transfer this to an airtight container. And you can use anything you have around the house. I'm actually using an old peanut butter jar that I've cleaned out. And I'm hoping that my mix will fit in here really nicely. So to put it in that, I'm going to take a measuring cup here. And I'm just going to transfer that to my storage container. Makes for less mess than trying to pour the whole mixing bowl in there. Now, if you fill up one of your containers, it's okay. Everything should be mixed evenly, so you can take the rest of your mix and you can actually put that in a different container. If you want to give this as a present, maybe you have a neighbor, so if 10 cups of oats, if you're doing a full recipe, sounds like a lot, you could make half a batch and take it to a neighbor so they can enjoy this for breakfast the next week. But once you have your recipe, this should store just fine in your pantry. And then next time you would like a bowl of oatmeal in the morning, all you have to do is open it up. You're going to use 1/2 a cup. So you just take a 1/2 cup from your mix, you pour it into a bowl. I like to add a 1/2 cup of water, so I do equal amounts. This is another measurement that you can play around with if you made it and you thought, oh, that was a little soupier than I wanted, or I would like more water. You can add that and adjust. So you can play around with the consistency of your oatmeal too. But I use 1/2 of mix and a 1/2 cup of water for mine. You just put it in a microwave safe bowl, mix it, microwave for 2 minutes, take it out, stir it up again really well, and then you can add any kind of toppings you would like. So if you have some nuts in your pantry, or if you have some fresh fruit, or maybe you would like some maple syrup to sweeten it a little bit more, you can add any kind of toppings you want, and then enjoy your homemade oatmeal mix. So I hope that you will use this. Again, it's a little bit healthier than our store-bought version of it with the little packets. It also saves us money, and it reduces the amount of waste because now we don't have all of that packaging that we're throwing away every time we make oatmeal. So I hope you try this, and I hope you enjoy. I'll see you again for another online programming again tomorrow. Bye-bye.